This video is brought to you by Henson Shaving. When Milei was on the campaign trail, perhaps his most eye-catching policy was a plan to scrap the peso and, quote, dollarize the Argentinian economy. However, almost immediately after coming to office, Milei staged somewhat of a U-turn, admitting that dollarization wouldn't happen anytime soon, and ditching a plan to appoint dollarization advocate Emilio Ocampo as head of Argentina's central bank. In a sense, this was unsurprising, as headline-grabbing a policy as it was, dollarizing the Argentinian economy without any dollars, which is where the Argentinian state was when Milei took power, was always going to be difficult, if not impossible. Nonetheless, 18 months or so into his term, and dollarization suddenly looks like a real possibility. A new IMF loan has endowed the Argentinian government with dollars, the free-flowing peso is holding strong against the dollar, and earlier this month, Milei announced a slew of policies aimed at essentially merging the formal peso economy with the informal dollar economy. So in this video, we're going to explain what dollarization actually involves, why it was always going to be difficult, and why Milei's recent policy successes have apparently mitigated those difficulties. We're getting ever closer to 1 million subscribers, and 68% of you haven't even subscribed yet. So lend us a hand and subscribe today. So let's start by explaining what dollarization actually involves. In Argentina's case, dollarization would involve doing basically two things. First, you have to replace all the pesos in circulation with dollars. This means not only converting all cash pesos into greenbacks, it also means converting peso deposits at Argentinian banks into dollars. Second, you need to redenominate the Argentinian state's peso-denominated debts. Originally, this would have required converting both the central bank's debts and the government's debts into dollars, because the central bank has also issued a whole lot of debt over the past few years. But Milei has shifted most of the central bank's liabilities onto the government, so now it would mainly involve just redenominating the government's debt. Milei argued that dollarization was necessary because it was the only way to prevent a future administration from destabilizing the Argentinian economy, as they've done in the past. Previous Argentinian governments have, in tandem with the central bank, basically printed too many pesos, stoking inflation and destabilizing the Argentinian economy. Dollarization would tie the hands of future administrations because they wouldn't be able to print pesos to get out of trouble. So even if Milei were to be replaced by a more profligate president in the future, which will probably happen eventually, they wouldn't be able to undo whatever progress he was making towards stabilizing the Argentinian economy. Nonetheless, while Milei clearly has a point here, after all, Argentina's political establishment have been consistently rubbish at monetary policy, when Milei took power, Argentina was in no position to dollarize, for at least 3 reasons. Problem number 1 was that the Argentinian government didn't have anywhere near enough dollars to convert its peso debt into dollar bonds, and its net foreign exchange reserves were actually negative. Problem number 2 was that it wasn't clear what the dollar-peso exchange rate was. When Milei took power, Argentina had a dual-track currency system, with a so-called official rate that overvalued the peso, and an unofficial or black market rate. This obviously made dollarizing more difficult, because you'd have to essentially guess the correct exchange rate. But if the rate offered is too low, you'll trigger a bank run, as Argentinians rush to take out their pesos before they're converted into dollars. And if it's too high, it'll be both unduly expensive for the state and inflationary. Problem number 3 was that, much like the state, Argentinian banks didn't have enough dollars. If you're going to convert Argentinians' peso deposits into dollars, you need to have enough dollars in the banking system to avoid a run. If banks don't actually have any dollars in the vault, Argentinians won't trust that they'll actually be able to withdraw dollars when they want to. And so everyone will rush to withdraw their dollars before the limited supply runs out, triggering a bank run and probably a financial crisis. So you get the idea. While dollarization had a clear rationale, it was difficult for Milei to do immediately upon taking office, largely because neither the Argentinian state nor the Argentinian banking system had enough dollars to pull it off. However, in the past couple of weeks, Milei has implemented a series of policies that at least partly solve these problems. In early April, he negotiated a new $20 billion loan with the IMF, which should help build up Argentina's dollar reserves, solving problem number 1. Then, only a couple of days afterwards, Milei removed all currency controls, essentially ending Argentina's dual currency system and creating one floating exchange rate for the peso. Not only does this solve problem number 2, i.e. the lack of clear peso-dollar rate, it turns out the peso is stronger than most people expected, falling by less than 10% when Milei relaxed controls. This makes life easier for the Argentinian government, both because it means it's less expensive to convert everything into dollars, and because it means the government didn't have to dip into its limited foreign exchange reserves to defend the peso. And then, in the past couple of weeks, Milei has implemented a series of reforms aiming to coax billions of dollars of hidden savings back into the Argentinian banking system. For context, because the peso has been so volatile for so many years, most Argentinians save in dollars. Not least because the government has a history of suddenly restricting access to savings and the tax system is both complicated and unpredictable, Argentinians don't save these dollars in the formal banking system. Instead, they use foreign banks, or literally stash their cash down the back of their mattresses. This has given way to a massive grey economy of activity that's not officially recorded or taxed. Roughly half of all workers are employed off the books, and formal employees are often paid some of their salary under the table. All in all, there's an estimated $271 billion in dollar savings spread throughout this grey economy, according to Argentina's national statistics agency, INDEC. In an attempt to crack down on this, the Argentinian government monitors taxpayers' every move. You need to show ID for cash purchases of more than about $180, which are then reported to the authorities, and if your spending doesn't match your declared income, you're at risk of being investigated. In practice, however, the main effect of these regulations is that they make it very difficult for people in the informal or grey economy to move back into the formal economy. To remedy this, Milei has recently announced an expanded tax amnesty and a relaxation of reporting rules that would allow Argentinians to deposit around $90,000 into the formal banking system without the authorities asking any questions. Milei is clearly hoping that these measures will attract billions of dollars back into the banking system, thereby solving problem number 3, and thus paving the way for full-scale dollarisation. Even if Milei doesn't do anything, this merging of the formal peso economy and the informal dollar economy might gradually push Argentina towards dollarisation anyway, given both Argentinians and Milei clearly prefer the dollar to the peso. That is, assuming Trump doesn't somehow undermine the dollar's appeal as a global currency. Lots of people actively don't like shaving. It's getting increasingly expensive, with brands selling overpriced razor cartridges stuffed with useless technology. And even if you do pay for all of it, you're often still left with a bad shave, razor burn, ingrown hairs, and irritation. That's a problem that Henson aimed to solve with their razor. So, in typical TLDR style, let me explain why Henson's razors are better for 3 reasons. Firstly, Henson's AL13 razor, which they produce at their aerospace machine shop, holds blades at a perfect 30-degree angle, extending the blade just 0.0013 inches past the shave plane. That's less than the thickness of a human hair, which keeps the blade supported properly, unlike many other companies' blades, and ensures a better protection for your skin. Secondly, they're just cheaper. Those fancy blade cartridges are full of single-use junk, which makes each individual blade way more expensive than what you actually need. Henson's razor just takes totally standard blades that cost just a few cents, which means you can save money and can refresh your blades more often, so you don't need to keep dragging a dull razor across your face to try and get value out of that overpriced plastic. Finally, speaking of plastic, those cartridges aren't good for the environment either, with 2 billion razor cartridges thrown away every year in the US alone. That's not true of Henson's blades, which contain 0 plastic, even in their packaging. If you want to try it out, go to hensonshaving.com/TLDR, or click the link in the description. Then add a razor and 100 blades to your cart. Once you've done that, add our discount code TLDR at checkout, and you'll get all of those blades totally free.